Shalom, greetings from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Israel at War update. Today we mark day 476 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched their murderous onslaught on October 7th of 2023. And we are currently, of course, within the outline of a ceasefire in which we are expecting the release of 4 additional hostages tomorrow, namely 4 female hostages. But let's turn now to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren, for the latest details on that. And if you could also expand specifically, the Lebanese file is a significant part, as well as Judea and Samaria. So please establish some headlines from all 3 fronts.
Right. So let's just mention before we get to Gaza that Israel has asked for an extension, a 30-day extension in its commitment to withdraw from South Lebanon, which was supposed to take place next week. It will probably get it, and therefore there will be peace and quiet, relatively speaking, on the northern front. Also, the Israel Defense Forces, the security agency Shabak, and the Border Patrol are going on with their operation, the counter-terror operation in Jenin, in the West Bank. They are finding a lot of arms and munitions. They are methodically combing the terror hub of northern Samaria, and this is supposed to go on for at least several more days. Now, as for Israel's main and southern front in Gaza, there are 3 levels of activity which we are focusing on. The first one, as you mentioned, is that Hamas is supposed to give Israel the list of 4 names of those female hostages who are supposed to be released over the weekend. Hopefully tomorrow, Saturday, but not later than Sunday. The other point is that there should be a lot of maintenance regarding this current phase of a 42-day ceasefire. And therefore, President Trump is assigning his emissary, Stephen Witkoff, to come to the area quite soon in order to make sure that the ceasefire and the other parts of the deal are holding. And the third one is the move from this first phase of the deal to the second one in order to make sure that all of the hostages are being released. So as we are right now anxiously awaiting the release of these 4 hostages, the deal seems to be in effect, but it's very fragile, and one cannot be complacent regarding its implementation and follow-up.
Also joining us from Central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly an IDF Chief of Cyber Staff and Israel Air Force Commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's always a pleasure to have you, Yaron. I'd like to ask you, General, about specifically the Gaza Strip, since within context of the current outline of the cessation of hostilities, it is being overflooded with humanitarian aid, with oil, with gas, with everything that is necessary to sustain a people. But nonetheless, we do see the devastation which Hamas has brought upon the Gaza Strip following the atrocities committed on October 7th. And it will take a long time to reconstruct all of that. What can we, from a broad strategic perspective, do in order to ensure that whatever is built there ensures that it's not once again the start for a possible network of tunnels of hundreds of thousands of miles, if I may call, state frankly, which ultimately are utilized for terror infrastructure and to conduct terror activities against the state of Israel, among others.
Yes, I think that what we're about to see, hopefully, is how the United States, the new administration, sets an example for what it means to be backing Israel with the long-term solution to Gaza. Um, you know, we have a huge practical problem. First of all, we have to finish Hamas, and at the same time, we have to get back our hostages. Now, some people think that this is, a hostage situation, that you have one or two hostages there and you don't negotiate with terrorists and so on and so forth. And the basic rule is true. You do not negotiate with terrorists. And within that line, Israel cannot allow Hamas to win, because that is a terrorist that has done something to a sovereign country and started a war and lost the war. You can't give them any prize coming out of this war. They can't get anything they want, basically. On the other hand, as I've said, as I've mentioned, practically in the near term, we have to make sure we get back all of our hostages, because it's not one or two hostages. You have to, in the minds of our viewers in the US, you always have to multiply it by the size of Israel and the relative size between Israel and the United States to understand how this thing is sitting on Israelis for 476 days. So we have to clear that thing away and be confident enough that Israel will be able to take care of this terrorist organization that must not continue to determine the future of Gaza. In the near term, there will be complexities and of practical things, as you've mentioned. What do we do with all these millions and all this international assistance pouring in? I actually don't know how this is going to be run, and there are going to be ups and downs on this. But I think the trick here, using the word trick is a little bit an understatement. The big challenge here now is to just get through these few months, these excruciating months of getting back the hostages, and then figure everything out. Because the wider picture is the more important picture. The United States needs to step in, both practically in Gaza, ensuring that Israel can get back the hostages, playing hard on Hamas. And I've heard the new national security advisor on that issue. And then at the same time, we have to look at what is the first step the new administration is going to set an example on in the region. Is it with Saudi Arabia? Is it with Lebanon? Is it in Gaza? It might be a few others, or the big game, is it with Iran? This is where our attention needs to be mainly at, because the setting of the example defines the whole game later on.
Strategic thinkers in Washington usually look at issues from the large pieces and let the small pieces fall into place. So when we're talking about this, and I'm not talking about the last administration, which utilized some of its most potent officials into the scheme of micro issues rather than macro. And therefore, it was quite odd from an American perspective, but nonetheless, the main issues that are going to be, at least from what I understand, everything is going to be on the prism of strategic power competition, first and foremost, namely China and Russia. And then Iran is, of course, a derivative thereof, and the weakest link within that alliance, which also includes, of course, North Korea. But time will tell how those matters will evolve, particularly taking into account that the foreign policy objectives that are laid out usually by the administration have yet to be unveiled. We're still very early on, and we need to give it some time. But let's go and zoom in now to Judea and Samaria, particularly the northern Samaria area and the vicinity of the city of Jenin. Mr. Oren, IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzia Levy, alongside the ISA or Shin Bet Director, Oren Bar, visited there, held a situational assessment. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, they were joined by the officers who are running this campaign, the commanding general of Central Command, the IDF Central Command, of course, not CENTCOM, Major General Avi Blut, and Brigadier General Yaki Dolf, who runs the Judea and Samaria division. And they were commended by General Halevi for the methodical way they operated, and indeed several terrorists who took part in earlier lethal terror acts were either apprehended or killed in firefights. And the operation goes on. And one important feature is that this is supposed to be a deep-rooted operation intended to forestall any effort by the terrorist organizations to renew their hold on the territory. So this cannot take place overnight. Of course, there must be some mass arrests. Then, of course, after interrogation, many are being released back into their communities. But some people are taken out. Let me just add to what General Rosen said. We don't yet have any idea whether President Trump would like to renew some of his old ideas or come up with new ones. But if we look back 5 years ago to his vision for peace and prosperity, what he said regarding the Palestinian state in being or in the making was that should certain conditions be met, his vision includes a sovereign, independent Palestinian state in both the West Bank and Gaza, but there are what he called Gaza criteria. And the Gaza criteria will force Hamas to meet the so-called quartet conditions. That is, recognize Israel, recognize the Oslo process, go for peace with Israel. And if that happens, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad can become, once again, as they were in 2006, part of the Palestinian government, but under the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas or whoever succeeds him. So President Trump, at least when he was first in office, was for a non-Hamas rule over Gaza by either the Palestinian Authority or some other international or national body accepted by the Palestinians.
So I will say that the last time around, the Palestinians rejected it outright, which is, of course, fundamental in any type of negotiations to have at least one side accept the deal. I don't think that Israel was overly excited about it either, to be fair. But nonetheless, what we hear from U.S. Ambassador to Israel, namely the designate Mike Huckabee, these are two scenarios, two different administrations, despite being the same president. They have different intentions also when it comes to Palestinian statehood, and he was quite clear about it, also highlighting his views and that he believes also reflect those of President Trump with regard to Judea and Samaria. But again, it's too early. I think all of this is speculative at best, and we need to wait and see what President Trump has in store. And ultimately, he needs to be convinced by some of his advisors to assume one course of action over the other, and we'll let that play out before we report on it. But General Rosen, when we're talking particularly about the current state of terror, if I may call it that, in the northern Samaria districts. There's a certain uptick in efforts by the Iranians to soar up terror activity by also flooding the area with munitions, with funds, something that the Jordanian Habara just recently, or just 2 days ago, was able to thwart a large smuggling attempt through its territory. Yesterday night in Davos, we heard the foreign minister of Jordan, Ayman Safadi, come out and say that they cannot afford to see a war in the West Bank, namely in the territories that I referred to earlier, similar to the manner in which it was conducted in the Gaza Strip. Of course, it's easy to say that, and it's easy not to provide alternatives, which the Jordanians don't have, and they have not specified it even once. But what should be done in order to, on the one hand, alleviate the concerns of the Jordanians, maybe assist them in thwarting the smuggling routes throughout their own territory, or other aspects? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think this goes to, some new initiatives that are very much needed in our region. And I hope the new administration takes this and does what needs to be done as boldly as was done by President Trump in his first administration regarding the Golan Heights. And I'm referring to Israel's final borders. I keep mentioning this in various in various discussions we're having here. The Israel's security starts at the Jordan River. I want to turn around for a moment, the river to the sea. Yes, Israel is from the river to the sea, and that is exactly what needs to be done. And actually, it starts at the Jordan River and it ends at the sea and at the Philadelphia corridor. These are things that people have to understand. Defensible borders are a fundamental part in how countries and nations secure themselves. I think that this administration, namely in regard to the southern USA border with Mexico, and what happened in the last 4 years with millions coming uncontrolled into the United States, it is a devastating thing. In the United States, it comes out in different ways than in the Middle East. Now, because borders in the Middle East are much more fluid these days in the whole Middle East. Like, what is exactly the border between Turkey and Syria? Turkey has been violating northern Syria for years and years during the last decade and a half. No, they don't care. Why? Because they have security problems. Same between Syria and Iraq, same between Jordan and its northern border and southern border, and so on and so forth. Israel needs to define its long-term defensible borders, and that is part of the security of Israel for the long term, and also the security of Jordan. It's a very important part of how we see the monarchy in Jordan surviving. It is very important for Iran not to see Jordan as a weak nation. And right now they're seeing them as a corridor into Judea and Samaria. And there's a reason I'm not using the word West Bank, which I think should be obliterated completely for how we talk about the West Bank. It's not a West Bank because the Jordanians let go of the West Bank as was once used. Judea and Samaria are contested only because there are 2.5 roughly Palestinians there. It is the ancient land of Israel and Israelites, Judah. There's a reason it's called Judea. And I think we have to consider talking about this in a new construct and putting the lines and defending them and building build understandings around them, and that will be the start of a new defensible, internationally recognized border that protects Israel while leaving room for pragmatic negotiations on Palestinian autonomy. That's basically how I would structure the future of what we call the Palestinian challenge in Israel and outside of it.
Indeed. Well, when referring to the West Bank, usually it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. But where does that West Bank stop? Of course, it was politicized and redefined for various reasons. But Mr. Oren, we don't have very much time left, and I still want to touch on the Lebanese file since this is very alive right now. You mentioned earlier the 60 days, they're set to expire this upcoming Sunday. And Israel has, as you mentioned, requested an extension of 30 days for the reason that the Lebanese armed forces and the UNIFIL forces have not yet made the progress that was outlined in the deal, and therefore, of course, an extension is necessary to fulfill that requirement. Israel does not intend to stay there. It intends to withdraw to defensible lines as per the agreement, and that is, of course, within a certain patch of a DMZ, a demilitarized zone that will be established along the blue line, so to speak, which is not yet enshrined within the various fora of the United Nations, as is done on other borders. But give us a brief 2-minute overview of the current state of play.
So, on earlier occasions, when Israel had incursions into South Lebanon, eventually Israel decided to withdraw either unilaterally or as part of a deal on trust. This cannot happen now because, as we all remember, this particular front became alive on October the 8th, 2023, by Hezbollah firing into Israel totally unprovoked, and Israeli residents left their homes. Many of those homes have been destroyed or gutted, and the residents will not come back if they are not certain that the war will not be rekindled. So Israel has every right to make sure before the IDF withdraws, not only to keep screening the area, finding more and more weapons aimed at its communities, but also to make sure that there are responsible units, either by a US supervised renewed Lebanese armed forces, or perhaps UNIFIL if it can be trusted. But short of that, Israel is going to safeguard the communities from the other side of the border.
General Rosen, in 3 minutes, strategically speaking, Israel must have a secure northern border, not only vis-a-vis Lebanon, but also vis-a-vis Syria. In the past, when Hezbollah was trying to establish a new front from the Syrian side of the border, Israel was very successful in somewhat eradicating those aspirations of entrenchment. Nevertheless, does Israel still view the entirety of its northern border as one contingent, or is it now once again looking at the Lebanese front and the Syrian front as two separate issues?
I think the strategy needs to be separate. It's one northern arena for sure. And there are connections, very strong connections. But when you build a strategy to defend Israel for decades to come, you need to take care of the overall strategy, but then one at a time, because it's so complex. Every border we have has such complexities that we need to, oversimplifying the northern front and saying that Lebanon and Syria are the same is just the oversimplification just does not do right to the practical challenges on the ground. Lebanon might be the place where this administration, the new U.S. administration, presses for a real new Lebanon. I've listened to Mike Waltz very carefully And it is very interesting to hear how he views the opportunity that we have in Lebanon. And I think it is. Israel created a huge opportunity to completely change Lebanon for decades. Now, the question is, will Lebanon seize the moment? And I think this is, again, part of how I see the opportunity and how it is taken by this administration. I'm not sure even that the US needs to pressure Saudi Arabia to go into the Abrahamic Accords. I would pressure them first to be the supporters and the stabilizing force of Lebanon to win over Qatar, because I think the Saudi influence is much better. Talking about the Sunni crescent, the new battle on the Sunni crescent, the Turkish Qatari versus the Saudi Jordanian Lebanese with the Egyptians. This is where we need to insist that this Sunni crescent stabilizes Lebanon, and from there, with all the things that were mentioned by Amir, I think we might even expect later on to Saudi Arabia joins the Abrahamic Accords, and that with the pressure campaign on Iran might be a very good way forward in the next few months.
Absolutely. Well, I will note that I also listened very carefully to what NSA Waltz stated, as well as what the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan al-Saud, said yesterday in Beirut, during the course of which he did urge President Aoun to reform the country and the institutions, and also voiced optimism about Lebanese capacity to root out the deep-rooted corruption in Lebanon at large and Beirut in particular, something that is necessary. Since wherever corruption is, naturally malign forces enter, and wherever corruption is, the Iranians are. So, being the main rivals of both Western civilization at large, Israel in particular, as well as Saudi Arabia for that matter, this needs to be done to be successful in also extinguishing the toxic flames, which Hezbollah has sparked in Lebanon over the course of the past 2 decades and more than that. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Zen and Mr. Owen for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.